And by the way, you mentioned one more peculiarity that can be in one line with the Nazi Germany. It's the thing that is very good historical parallel. It's dedicated to the cruelty towards the civilian population. So in your opinion, is this a direct influence, especially of propaganda during all these years before the start of full-scale invasion to Ukraine, or it's still a complex of circumstances that are maybe compatible with the current effects of Russian propaganda and its goals that it was in previous century and for now? Because we have a huge difference in an informational environment and field. So in the previous century, they had only the opportunity of newspaper and maybe radio to spread the propaganda. But now we live in the informational environment, but still people like blind and deaf just sitting like a zombie at the television and listen whatever the propagandist says. So is that the complex problem, or it's still Goebbels propaganda that works through the centuries?
Well, in the case of, again, keep in mind that every authoritarian regime, every fascist regime has to employ propaganda. Is just part and parcel of the very essence of these regimes, for the very simple reason that they're always manipulating their populations. Since these regimes are generally ineffective politically and economically, or at least in the long run, they need to be able to brainwash the population, and they need to be able to coerce the population. So it's not surprising that they engage in political repression, assassinations, concentration camps, prisons. Now, again, there are varying degrees. So the Nazis were extreme, Stalinist Russia was extreme, but you find that in all these regimes. In terms of the propaganda, obviously, again, there's a continuity in the sense that whether it was Goebbels or whether it was Mussolini or whether it was Stalin, Brezhnev, or Putin, propaganda was essential to the maintenance of these regimes because you have to be able to manipulate people, but at the same time, keep in mind that these regimes always have some kind of transformational goal. They want to create the new German, the new Italian, the new Russian, the new Soviet, right? The new Soviet man, the new Soviet person, the new Russian person, the turbo patriot, the Z patriot. These are always the goals of these sorts of regimes. I mean, they want, on the one hand, simply to stay in power, but at the same time, they realize that in order to stay in power and to succeed, they need to change the mentality of their populations. So, in that sense, they try to control whatever key media that influence the people. So in the 1930s, that was radio, of course, because essentially that was the only means. Well, radio and, of course, newspapers, magazines. In the 1940s and 1950s, television came into its own. And as you can see, it's still very important. Certainly the majority of the population in the Russian Federation gets its news from official television stations. But at the same time, thanks to the internet, there are these alternative media. But it's precisely because of the fact that the internet is in principle it's difficult to control. It comes from everywhere. On the other hand, it can be limited. It can be controlled. The Chinese regime does a very effective job of doing that. Putin tries to do the same thing. But at the same time, is he succeeding? And this is a very interesting question because, as you know, the popularity ratings of the key Russian propagandists like Solovyov, Skabyev, Simonyan appear to be declining significantly. So people seem to be getting tired of this kind of propaganda. At the same time, Russians seem to be more interested and willing to listen to the internet. And I think one indication of the fact that the Putin regime is somewhat worried was the recent meeting that Putin had with the military bloggers. And these are people who have no particular status within Russian society. Many of them are simply working on the internet on the basis of their own initiative. And yet Putin devotes a substantial amount of time to an extended meeting with these people who have no official standing. And I think that's the recognition of the fact that he appreciates that the internet is becoming increasingly important and that his regime is not doing quite an adequate job in controlling it. And it may be that it's just impossible ultimately to control it, given YouTube, given Telegram and things like that. But clearly something is taking place, and there seems to be an awareness on the part of the regime that it has to do more in order to get its message across. And of course, part of the reason for that is that even Russians, even those who think just a little, not necessarily a lot, but just a little, have to be aware of the fact that the war isn't going quite like it was supposed to. They may see no alternatives to the war. They may see no alternatives to Putin, but some of them increasingly have to be aware of the fact that the war, which was supposed to take 3 days, is now taking 16, 17 months. Well, something is wrong with the picture. Something is wrong with the official propaganda line.
But they
or at least what
they actually try to find the explanation each time that the answer is appearing in the audience, why it's so long time it takes this operation.